Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us here today. My name is Victoria Sung, and I'm Assistant Curator of Visual Arts here at the Walker Art Center, and I'm joined by Kinji Akagawa and Aaron Spangler, two artists who, as you will know, have wonderful works in the Wurtele Upper Garden, and the weather has actually turned out to be really nice today, so after the talk, we really encourage you to go and walk outside and see the sculptures in person. So Kinji and Aaron have agreed to join me in conversation. I'm really hoping that they will engage in conversation with one another to discuss their sculptures in the garden. Kinji's garden, Seating, Reading, Thinking, was commissioned for the 1988 opening at the Minneapolis Sculpture Garden and has been a favorite spot for many decades for visitors to rest, read, and reflect. Aaron's newly commissioned Bog Walker, his first permanent outdoor sculpture cast in bronze, is a dynamic organic form covered with etchings of hands and tools and toys and other materials of everyday life. And so before we begin, I'm going to give quick introductions, although I think they're probably unnecessary given their outsized influence in the Twin Cities and beyond. Kinji Akagawa was born in Tokyo and began studying design in Japan before continuing his studies at the Cranbrook Academy of Art in Michigan, as well as the Minneapolis College of Art and Design, where he eventually taught for more than 30 years. Kinji's work has been referred to as public sculpture because it often employs natural materials and open places used by many people. But rather than making things, he asserts that he works on quality of life installations and experiences. Kinji has received commissions for site-specific installations in parks and public spaces throughout the United States, and he lives and works in Afton, Minnesota, with his wife and fellow artist Nancy Gipple, who is here with us today. And Aaron Spangler reimagines the technique of wood carving to create works that speak to a collective consciousness grounded in the Midwestern landscape and contemporary American culture. Starting with solid blocks of basswood, Aaron carves detailed scenes and motifs into large bas-reliefs and freestanding sculptures that are at once abstract and figural. Aaron received a BFA from the Minneapolis College of Art and Design and lives and works in Park Rapids, Minnesota. And so I think maybe where we'll get started is, I know you guys have a long history together. Kinji, as I mentioned, taught at MCAD for over 30 years. And Aaron was one of his students, and so just earlier you guys were recollecting some of these memories, and I wonder if you could start there.
Okay, want to start? I quit being a teacher, I'm retired. So.
So I started at MCAD in '89. So a year after your bench was put up, and really got to know Kinji. We had a program there called the interdisciplinary something, where we could kind of invent our own thing. So I wanted to study sculpture and music, and then there was 5 or 6 teachers, and we met 4 times a semester, and we all got to know each other quite well, and Kinji was a great mentor to me. And
what was Kinji teaching at the time? What was Kinji teaching?
I was teaching. I don't know. I wasn't teaching really.
Yeah.
I was listening to students. More like it. And thank you all coming. It's wonderful to see some of my old students' face and a wonderful group of people. I'm so lucky to be surrounded with, Minneapolis and St. Paul and Minnesotans. It's always, I'm in my heart a Midwestern, so he is a Midwestern. We've been on and off together quite a while, and wonderful program we started when we were teaching, and then Aaron is one of the very unique students. When I saw him first, he was sewing in a student lounge. Actually sewing. And I said, "What the hell are you doing?" He was making a flag for his fort. So it's that kind of beginning we had. It was totally outside of formal teaching or learning. And pretty much we left ourselves alone, but when we got together, it intensified pretty big. The teacher called David Nye Brown, my wonderful teacher, as well as colleague. We lost him a few years ago, but he was the anchor person for all of us, beyond the idea of art, beyond the idea of teaching, learning. And I want to mention, before I start, this I wanted to say. So this is an honor to my teachers as well as to my students who are here. This I discovered a few years ago, and then I used it so many times, but since teacher, student, I retired, I'm no longer a teacher. He is my teacher today. And I should say this one is Robert Filio. He is from Fluxus movement. And he said, this is very, very important to start out today's session. We must become part of an art of living, lived by all concerned, so that so the distinction between teaching and learning disappears. Being, doing, and making are much more useful concerns. I really agree with that. And art is a process. At the limit, everything is art. Everybody is an artist. Meanwhile, professional artists must participate in collective dreams. So that's Robert Filio's. Teaching and learning, I've been so-called, like Vicky says, 30 years of teaching. But I was involved with more like a minority as such. America adopted me as a human being, and I was in a learning mode always. And indeed, students are my teachers, I should say. And one of the important part that Native American teacher, Ruth Voigt at MCAD, she said, in Ojibwe, there's no teacher or student. Only the circumstances and the condition makes who is a teacher and who is a student. Isn't that beautiful? Mm-hmm. The condition is more important, so we can switch around. One is a teacher, the one is a student, or context as it changes. That's the learning. And Ruth was really wonderful. Yeah. Again, Native Americans, they have a wonderful wisdom and then the sayings, all that. I was helped by those words, and then Aaron was one of my students, but at this point, since I retired, I'm no longer a teacher. He is my teacher, so he should say from now. Okay, so your turn.
Well, I was just thinking about how David Nye Brown really, he became kind of the mentor for all of us in that group, teachers and students. But also, he was always talking about good parenting, bad parenting. He was deep, really involved in psychology and how this like screws up society or not, and the idea about the teacher and the student, those lines blurring. I mean, I think good parenting is like when you're following the child or listening to the child, and he used to reference Christianity in that, like, do you follow the child, the faith of the child, which is that you as an adult need to learn from what they're giving to you. And it's interesting, I hadn't thought about Ruth, but she was another really important teacher, and she taught a couple classes in Native American Studies, and which I had grown up around a lot on White Earth Reservation in that area, but she really opened my mind up to more things than just the usual stuff that you learn in high school about, whatever. So it was, there were some pretty amazing teachers at the time.
Right. Yeah. Again, our MCAD, what's best was not a big university. We are so, in a sense, intimate. If you have students here, how many of you went to MCAD, right? Yeah, great. Thank you. those am I right to say was a kind of intimacy was very important? Yeah, not learning or teaching that clear distinction. So I think that we got lucky in that environment. I think it's a Midwestern instead of Eastern intellectuals or Western communitarianism. But I think Midwestern, again, I thank for Hubert Humphrey and all the wonderful group of people even still coming out, and the Midwestern gentleness and then deep consideration, throws to American democracy. I really think they are one of the most important group of people, teachers and all that, Thanks to Amy, and thanks to a few others, yeah. Amy gave us a wonderful dedication speech the other day at our opening of Sculpture Garden again. So it was, anyway, it's that kind of thing. So, okay, maybe you can talk about your commission and your piece a little bit.
He's back in charge.
Yeah. Speaking of teaching and learning and teaching, so Aaron and Kinji's piece are in conversation with one another.
Yeah, Kinji is above mine, looking down, kind of.
Nice to know that.
Yeah.
I don't know. Aaron, do you want to start first, or?
Yeah, Aaron,
sure,
you
sure.
start. Yeah.
Yeah. So when I was invited to make an outdoor piece, I guess kind of maybe it was suggested, but I also really excited about using bronze because I haven't really done it on a large scale before, and with someone else paying for it, it's financially viable. And I wanted to learn, use it as a learning process to do that. So, but I still wanted to express that shape through wood. So, do you have the other image here? So you can see I had a big block of wood glued up. There's a retired guy north of me that retired woodworker, and he glues up these giant blocks for me. And how he does it or heaves them around, I have no idea. But in the end, he comes out with a forklift and he's got it. How large is the block of wood? So the block would be, I think it was was it 30 by 36 and a little over 8 feet tall. So they're basswood 4x6s, and so you glue them up into panels and then glue all those panels together. And I had a few. The first things that came to my mind was I live in the cutover region that T.B. Walker and the Red River Logging Company, made all their fortune on, or their first fortune, which is interesting since it's going to the Walker. But that all seemed kind of too obvious, and so I just started carving this shape and wanted to get a little more away from the more overtly social commentary and political stuff of my other work and my relief work. And so this really started to become more just about nature and my experience in nature. I live in the woods, and we're kind of we have all these islands or glacial moraines surrounded by bogs, and so the bogs are this kind of mysterious, unconquerable, I don't know what seas really, and also the idea of the bog as that was something that wasn't of use to the timber industry. It was, it's still really the same. They used to bomb the bog up north of Red Lake, but even after all the bombing that they did up there for target practice, it still just reabsorbed itself, and so I think about it as a very a resistant, metaphor. Mm-hmm. And so I made this shape, and I don't know if I can say exactly what it is. It's a lot of things, and I just kept working it till it wasn't anything too specific. So it was many things to me, and that's kind of a weird, nuanced place to be, and it just happened when it happened. So.
And it bridges the abstract and the figural, and you've kind of described it to me also as a shape that's emerging out of the forest.
Yeah. So it's just coming out of my experience with nature and all the study and the looking, and And then after the wood panel was carved, which is this piece, it went to a foundry, and then they made, I think, 9 panels off of it and welded that together, welded the bronze together. So it was kind of a process.
And the bronze there, you've described it to me as kind of like a chocolate bunny. It's a bronze shell.
not the shape, but the actual, that's what bronze is. Yeah, it's like a thin skin. It's all hollow inside. Yeah. Can
you talk a little bit more about the surface carvings? I know you have different objects that you trace, and how do you come up with that abstract pattern?
Yeah, so when I was doing a lot of woodcuts, I made all these stencils out of just whatever I could find in my studio, outside of the studio, and then I kept seeing the same things, and I was like, there's got to be more things that I'm not seeing. So I had an assistant of mine at the time whose grandparents had a junk store. So she went and just traced everything she could find. We cut all those out, and so I've got a stack of these stencils of things. At this point, I don't really know what all of them are. Some of the things I kind of know what they are, but most of them are old tools that deal with what you do in rural living or breaking down of nature, like farm tools. And if you think about lumbering and farming as taking something natural and raw and breaking it into something that you can use to survive as a person. And so I use these shapes they become more abstracted as they get carved, because the shapes are drawn on, and then there's some outlining, and then I'm just carving with V-gouges and making lines. The lines really come from the different kinds of chisels, and it creates this abstract imagery across the piece.
Yeah, I remember when I was up in your studio, you pointed out some of the objects that you kind of recognized, and you said there was, a deer hunting rifle that your uncle had gifted to you, or like an old 2-man saw that was your grandfather's or your great-grandfather's.
I mean, yeah, all this stuff has significance, but it doesn't. I mean, you don't really have to know that, but
You're using that
for
as
me,
like
it's like, yeah, right. And in the end, you will take away what you can, and sometimes you'll see things in there like, oh, this I recognize that object. That's good for you, Then you got that. So, but it's not. I don't have a thing that I'm trying to. I guess that's what I mean. Getting a little more away from, at least with this sculpture, backing away from more overt commentary and just letting that be what it is. Somehow, with Donald Trump elected, I went the opposite way. But we'll see the next stuff. I don't know, but.
And Aaron was pretty unique. When everybody was dealing so-called formal studies of sculpture, painting, he was the only one who really started out this subjectivity as a core starting point. Something it had to be real for him, not the theory first, and I'm going to be a minimalist, or I'm going to be a casting sculptor. None of that. He started out with his child stories, and we had a wild talk when we got together. Okay, he was telling me his fought in the woods and guns and hunting, and which I never had that kind of experience before. But he was telling me all these things, and that was a beginning of a kind of allowance to the students that they could go on, starting out subjective and intersubjectivity, and in search of some kind of theoretical language from his body of the work, not outside of himself, but herself, but always coming out, a dialogue out of the work, and we found some kind of clicking point. And I think that was a very, very unique, I think teachers allowed around me and then tell me your personal stories. How did you grow up? It's that kind of thing. It's very important. And it wasn't the time of art history and then intellectual discourse and theory first, and after that you start making things. We are reverse indeed. And we got lucky. I know some of you remember those days. So, right? So, okay.
Yeah, I think that was so valuable to, I think most of the artists that I know, from that time was that I mean, MCAD was, there wasn't, they weren't teaching any craft or anything like that.
That's
but,
right.
I didn't learn anything about wood. I was making stuff out of junk, But the one thing, at least specific to this program, and I think you and David and Brown, was pushing the idea of you instead of, we had critical theory, we had all that stuff.
That's right, yeah.
But we're not making work from that.
Mm-hmm.
We're making work out of working, just the physicalness of working.
yeah.
And then we try to articulate what we're doing, and that's why you're in art school. Otherwise,
Yeah.
you're just making stuff, which is fine,
Right. Yeah.
But why you're in art school? Because you want to maybe articulate what you're doing
Yeah.
through words to a certain point,
Yeah.
or maybe you don't. But otherwise, what are we all doing together? We have to talk about something, right?
I remember visiting your studio in Brooklyn, and we were talking, and then he was telling me, Kinji, we got lucky. Rob Fisher, and we got lucky. What do you mean? We meet all these MFA guys from Yale and all these big-time schools, but they're talking about theories. That we just did it. This allowing this intuitivity, again, this Robert Filius, doing and acting is more like the beginning of one's own thinking and the critical attitude. Once you express something, what's the next stage anyway? You look for some others to look at it, and the history comes with it. Have you seen this one? Have you talked with this kind of, have you heard? So it's a second part after doing your work. Thinking comes as dovetailed and then goes into cultural values or historical values or interpersonal values. So I think we allowed ourselves to be doing, and then allowing it to be intuitive part is one of the most important part of starting a point. Theory will come later. And that was the part. So we didn't ignore theory, right?
Well,
Yeah.
Do you remember how Ron Dahl started his sculpture class? Was you are the authority on your own experience.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, well,
Yeah.
it was yeah.
Yeah. So it's, I think, overall, like still going on conceptual art and the wonderful, pop artists and around, all those influences are there. But we found out later, I think Jasper Jones is the same way. Like pick up something and do something to it and do something else to it. That's what Jasper started out, that language. And then Jasper and I think Robert Rauschenberg, they went to the public library after the work, and then they checked in the surrealism and all these things. It's not beforehand, So it's I really think American democracy works out that way. We make a mistake, but it's a chaos, and it's terrible. But along the way, in the process, I think we find ourselves, and each other we find it. Beautiful falling in love. It's the same kind of thing, isn't it? If you care the other, Wittgenstein says so too. Once you start to talk, you bounce off. You cannot talk about certain things. But that is the gap. It's very, very important. Intersubjectivity becomes absolute core of aesthetic experience. You fall in love. You talk, you listen, you cry with it, you smile with it, and then...
Sometimes you hate it.
Yeah, you hate it, and it stays in your body. Not in the head, but it stays in here, I think. That's where starting and the ending. And some say, studying art is like studying philosophy. It's the same thing. One is language and one is visual perception. So it's the same kind of question asking, and at the end, we are still lost. We are in between no yes or no world, maybe world. But this maybe keeps us going. So Anyway.
Kinji, speaking of doing, making, and then thinking,
Yeah.
can you talk about seating, reading, thinking? And I know you have a beautiful story attached to it.
To talk about your own work, right? Yeah.
This was a piece that was
Yeah.
commissioned originally for
That's
the
right.
opening of
Yeah.
the Sculpture Garden. So
Yeah.
if you can kind of go into that history and talk about
Right.
how it was created
Yeah.
anew.
30 years ago, I was the same age as Aaron when I got the commission. And I was as stupid as ever before. No, don't know exactly what the hell I'm doing. But I knew something artist is to bring a non-art part to the art world and to consider. I think that was a kind of very important part. And Martin came, and Martin says, I hear you're doing something, but I haven't seen your piece in the gallery or museum anywhere, What are you doing? Because I said, I'm sort of hiding, and I make pieces and them set up by the lake, and I take a picture and I escape before police come. That was kind of temporal work. But I was thinking, again, a kind of an Asian tradition, and there's no separation, what is useful, what is useless. And all these conceptual art came to the bang on the wall. Couldn't go any farther than that. If idea becomes more important than an object or things in the world, killing loses, and then I think to me. So I went back to my sort of old Japanese or Asian styles of ornaments here, and the ceramic is very, very important to me. Wood is very important to me. Natural material was very important, especially near me. And then I found, of course, Frank Lloyd Wright, and then all these wonderful architects are doing using local material, all these things. So anyway, I showed some of the slides, and Martin said, why don't you meet this group of people? And then if they like your work and your studio visit, okay, maybe you can get a commission to make a bench. So I said, great. And then I met a few people came. It was a wonderful group of people, and one family member, they said they will support you, and then I went to Martin. And Martin says, okay, you start making a few things, but I want the full-scale model. Wait a moment, bench. If I'm going to make a full-scale model, might as well commence to the making stuff. But what do you want to do? So I said, I'm the little peanut here. All the incredible, famous artists from Europe and then the U.S. I'm a local one. It's true. And then what I'm going to do? Okay, bench. But then I thought not just a physical rest. Of course, we, such a big, incredible pieces around. We needed to sit and think, or sit and read a brochure, something like that. So, okay, I'll make that kind of thing. So I made a bench for seating and the reading and the thinking. All three to happen in this bench. So no backs, you cannot relax that much in this one. Sorry, you cannot go to sleep. So you just sit and contemplate. All of us, right? When we are a bit tired or a bit overwhelmed, we have to sit naturally. And where you're going to sit, I thought Minnesota virgin wood, I wanted to use that. Okay, it wasn't available timber size, So, okay. How about the wood or cast iron or anything outside piece? So I said, no, nobody wants to sit on the stone when you want to rest. It's too cold in the wintertime and too hot in the summertime. I want to go with the wood. Martin was so worried about that. No, everybody's going to curve and it's going to be damaged and it's not going to be any good in a few years. But I said, that's public art. If everybody wants to play with it, they can. And we have no say of that. That's a socially viable piece, maybe some collaborative piece to make. I convinced him. He said, okay, yeah. And he said, I usually don't listen to all the critics and then writers, he said, I only listen to the artists, whatever they want to do. And then I really want to support artists' statement and then all that. So he was really gracious, wonderful with me, you know. And so many guys had a hard time, commission, do this, do that. I got lucky, maybe being a little Japanese and a minority. He was very kind. And I did what I wanted. And then that's where it is. And 30 years later, now Vic says, August says, want to do it again. Wood is rotten. So, well, okay. So I got lucky for the new location, and the location really makes it this time. You know, it's a wonderful place, and we went around, and where will be the best, and the Vic, and our Joe King here, and again, it's a collaborative one. I didn't have to insist anything, or it's not a self-experience. It's again process of these wonderful ideas comes, and one good idea, all of us agree, you know, and this place finally, well, Kinji, can't do this, how about this? And Joe said, okay, okay, let's do that. So that was a place, and then now you can see Sculpture Garden, beautiful, downtown, so beautiful. It's not my seating, but the location is beautiful. Whatever everybody says, location, 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 right? So I hope it's gonna be good, yeah.
Kinji, can you talk a little bit more about the materials? I know you were listening.
Okay, material, to decide the material, I went to Cold Spring, and that time, well, Martin wanted to go together. Martin says, okay, let's go together. I have a few places I want to use a stone. And the Noguchi piece, and then a few other European, as you know, all the sculpture, they had a stone basis. So he wanted to see that too. So we went together, drove to Cold Spring, and then which one you think? And yeah, this stone is from Dakota, area. And then that it's a raw big stone, and he said, "Oh, cut it, and then we can do that." So, okay, so we picked the stone together. And then wood, I wanted to use a virgin wood, but we didn't have it. So he said, yeah, go order to some lumberyard. And then I ordered, and the cedar came from Washington State. And the other stones, basalt, came from our Taylor's Falls area. And the white one is just a field stone. Mm-hmm. So if material is we are familiar with, Midwesterners, like right away, there's no strangeness, but the familiar, so you will be psychologically, physically comfortable. Well, that's a starting point, I thought. And then I used all those material from local. And that was the decision making for choosing the material. Again, psychological or regional stuff. And then I think that's, I am really happy that it worked out okay. Yeah. So,
and the stone is cut in, the wood is inlaid into the stone, right?
That's
the wood
right.
is not
Yeah.
scribed around the stone?
Right.
Yeah.
It's a little bit suspended and floating, I hope, Yeah. So that was important. One end is holding and sitting on. One end is pinned and then kind of floating. So when you sit, there's some kind of, not just a seat, four-legged, regular chair or bench, But the thickness of the wood makes you really comfortable, I think. If it's a veneer and the thin one, then it's just, like a plywood or some kind of everydayness. But this was really important to have that thickness of the timber, one piece. So you sit and you become one. So you become sculpture indeed, not the bench. You're sitting on it. And you are more important than the piece itself. So,
and isn't the top of the stone, there's a little lectern thing cut in?
It's a lectern. Mm-hmm. So you can read the books, or you can give a small group. I was hoping that the poets will reuse a lot of times. Okay, and then Scott Burton was very, very important to me too. What a beautiful guy he was. And then his heart always, when I heard, struck me that Kinji, it's very important to manifest the caring. And we don't talk about the decorative art, and I was using a functional object as an art, and not the non-functional always, so we look at it and then all that. So it's a kind of usefulness was important, but the Scott is the one said decorative art we have to discuss a lot more in American culture. Wonderful, isn't it? We just, that's decoration and forget it. Are you kidding me? Our house, our environment, is a lot of those beautiful pieces around us, And Mel Chin too. When we had a meeting with Mel, we met at one of those Holiday Inn place, lounge, student that we met. And look at this. All these different periods of Art Nouveau and everything. It's just contains, and then that makes us, sort of place. So it's a reviewing and rethinking, reusing, reconstructing. I think this idea of was so important to the idea of democratic art, American art. Not something unique. But we already know, but somewhat so many people were doing that, I don't separate the craft, and Warren is here, and he knows that the idea of Minge, people's art, is like a public art. And then the public art is already beginning, is public. There's no private art and the public art. We are not the public employees or public school teachers. It's not that kind of idea of public. Being artists is already socially, historically involved. So we can produce, you can comment on, and that's it. So that's the kind of dialogue we've been having. I think it's a very, very misconception of self-expression and ends that. No, self-expression becomes self-critique and discovery of self and the others along with it, and Heidegger's being in the world is the being, not just a being. Becoming in the world is the being, he says. So I think being involved with art or making stuff, right away we become very unsure. Am I okay in the craftsmanship? Am I using the right tools here? I better look around. It's like a drawing class. As soon as you're involved, somebody else is a fantastic drawer always, and you feel terrible, holy crap. They're much better drawing. So it's that kind of inferiority complex we've been growing up, right? Yeah. In the maybe world, and not yes and no. But I think this is the source of insecure. I used to say to you guys too, Kinji Insecure Akagawa. And we have same middle name. I don't know, some of you may remember. Insecure is our name, But that makes us possible to this dialogical situation. It's not the you against me. It's a collaborative in search of something together. I think that's American artist does. It's no longer maestro like a European maestro or architect maestro and a bow tie. So it's a Walker too. It's not a Walker Art Center. To me, Walker is a contemporary art research center. Walker Contemporary Art Research Center is my Walker Art Center. It's not the end product that we bring to, and hey, we are good, We create something. Are you kidding me? We just reorganize, represent, and we review ourselves. I think it's simple. Complicated, but simple processes. Anyway.
Kinji, this sounds like you've said before to me you're interested in this move from an egotistical self to an ecological self, and it's with this work too. I think you can see you pull in so many different influences as well that informs your artistic practice. And you were mentioning Scott Burton, who is an influence. You said, and his work is right outside, situated close to yours, to continue that conversation.
Right, egotistical self to egotistical self is the language of, given by, what's her name? Excuse me. She teaches at the University of Illinois in the Circle campus, but she is the one coined phrase that, and then how I understood is that's true. We all start from ego, ideal self, something we think is detached. And then, I have to say things, I have to dance, I have to write, I have to paint, I have to make some box or something like that. And that's ego. First, we start out the ego, but as soon as we produce, we have to bounce off something. We are caught with these social relationships or historical relationships, or somebody who did the same kind of things. We search our internal stuff. And then, so this is, again, ecological self is in search of relationship, that's all. Nothing to do with the natural environment and then, all these things. Eco is the etymology of eco is a relationship. I'm looking for some relationship with others. And I found the relationships with, let's say, Joseph Beuys and the incredible guy of Duchamp, and then, my God, the found object becomes art, huh? That's non-art becoming art, and my God, all these historical bouncing, and then all these great ones that you meet, and then becomes real, and I feel like, ego is losing, and then ego self is much more important. So that's a transition, I think, it occurs, So then once you understand that the relationship, without a relationship, I cannot survive, even artist or as a human being. So, but this, without the ego trap, I don't think you can find a real ego self. From the beginning, you try to learn eco self, it's a fake. It's like a philosophy existing outside of me, and I studied, and then I was wrong. Malaparte says, no, philosophy doesn't exist outside of you, the pre-existing, and you discover it, that's not. Philosophy is like art. You make, and you fail, and you make again, and you discover through the process genuine kind of understanding of the world and in relation to yourself. So I tended to agree that, So selfishness is absolutely important on the beginning, but soon you bounce off the wall and then, can't go anymore. Forget it.
Speaking of the egotistical or ecological self, Aaron, I think a lot of your work too is infused by relationships, and especially the relationships that you have up north in Park Rapids. You mentioned, one of your neighbors who had kind of glued together the blocks of wood, and you've mentioned to me in the past there's this kind of vernacular tradition up north about the sharing of knowledge. Can you talk about that in relation to your work?
Yeah, for me, I really discovered that when I first moved back to build this house that is now my house. When I was after college, I must have been 23 or 24 when I started that, and I needed money, so I got a job at the sawmill there in Two Inlets, and where they're just loggers are bringing stuff in, they're cutting boards, and I was able to build a house out of a lot of the scrap from that, and I realized there was so much. MCAD was, my art education, and then really the sawmill was like my master's degree. Yeah. Because the old guys that I worked with there, the Ojibwe guys, the deep stories they had, directly coming out of history, the history they lived, stuff that isn't written down, and I learned so much about I mean, not just about the material or trees and how they grow and cutting boards and all that, but because there is a real art to that. It's they used to say there's sawyers and there's wood butchers, and wood butchers just cut it up, and the sawyer knows how to get the optimum beautiful boards out of a log.
Yeah.
And a lot of that's based on the sound of how when the saw goes through the log, it sounds different if there's rot or blue or shake in there or anything like that. And also the smells that come out of the log. So there's a lot to know there. And so it wasn't just learning about the wood, but also the history of the whole state and the country. You know, the guy that I worked for, and we worked out in the cold every day. It was a very outside job all winter. It was one of the coldest winters in 96, you know, I think 95, 96 when I was working there. And this guy had been a tank driver in World War II in the South Pacific. He'd worked on the Iron Range. He had an 8th grade education, but he was a genius. He had his memory was unbelievable. He just read encyclopedias for fun. But if you talk to him, he just like sounds like the hillbilly, right? Yeah. But a brilliant person. His whole family was brilliant.
Isn't that great?
So that family that owned the sawmill really took me in, and I learned a lot. And then the guys I worked on the line with in the mill, where it was mostly Ojibwe guys from White Earth, and just the stories. A lot of tragic stories, but incredible stories. They all grew up peeling pulp, working in pulp camps for this guy when they were kids, you know, and the generosity, the work ethic, the community work ethic, and what you do for your neighbor and what you do for each other. It was incredible, and it really shaped who I am today.
Great
and so those relationships, and so I always think about this, like without the sawmill, I think about all the guys and women that make their living around this sawmill. You know, the cabinet makers, the carpenters, firewood guys, because they sell firewood out of there, and then myself. And if it weren't for that community people doing that, and when they stop, or if there's nobody to take it over, that's it. It's done. There aren't very many small sawmills like that. They're not making a fortune, but when you work there, your family, you're taken care of. And it's really the happiest job I ever had. It was that way I was unfulfilled as far as like I wasn't unfulfilled by torturing myself being an artist, right? But you know, it's like, so there's some things you're drawn to do that don't necessarily make you happy, you know. But that really made me happy. Being part of a 5-man crew.
That's a great perception.
The smell, the sound, the wood, being part of this human machine, and then learning. You know, when you're working with people open up. When you're not in conversation, you know, you tell stories.
That's right.
When you're on the job that you're surprised that someone would tell you. And so I really learned a lot there in that way. And so as far as like relations community, that was really where that came from. I really support
that. I think that's one of the most important thing I heard from you. And I think it's so important that like Piaget's our genetic epistemology in the book, you know, this is a wonderful example that, okay, what you're talking about. Our body already knows, and then he gives a little kid a little project about 10 pencils, you know, in front of it, and then short one, then the long one. And then he says, I want you to arrange from short one to the longest one, and then do that. And those who are convinced within a literal culture, language culture, cannot do that. No matter how much he does, it's arrange, rearrange, and he cannot make up his mind. But if you live in oral culture, you use 5 senses, okay? So all 10 pencils, he said that this child goes boom like that. And the longest one, next one, next one, 10 pencils, right there. Visual experience, physical experience, he knows. Same kind of things, okay? Like my mother, She passed away at the 95, but she was coming out of oral culture. She went to only elementary school. And so she came from Japan in a rural section. She comes from not the literal culture, language culture, but really the oral culture. So when she came and visited us, she says, okay, what are you going to do today? Let's go shopping, okay? And then, okay, what time are you going to go shopping, Kinji? So I said, about 10, maybe 11 in the morning. So, okay. And 5 minutes later, mother asks me again, what time was it? 10 or 11? I said, okay. That's I said, okay, are you okay? And she says, okay. She doesn't take notes. I realized later on. She was making sure that what our communication is concrete. And 10 o'clock came, she was already in kimono and waiting by the entrance exit. And time to go. See? These are, instead of, okay, excuse me. Instead of this literal culture, we depend on the note-taking and the language too much. But if you believe in this physical one, when our soul isn't going well, we hear the sound that, something going on here. It's no good. I have to stop and check my circular soul, right? Smell is not good. Oh, this wood is rotten. It's no good. All these physically, we already are being in the world, so we know. It's just we open the open again. Heidegger says we have to be open the open. Then we don't know how to shut down, close our body. So you remember right sound and the wrong sound. You remember good smell and the bad smell. It's like eating too, right? Nobody teaches you. But when you have a good ice cream or a good thing to eat, smell and everything is right. And something not kosher, well, something wrong, I have to stop and check. So these are, body is the knowledge of our world. If we switch around, of course, language is important, the poet is important, but I think a poet is talking about like a world, She or she's talking about always a smell or a metaphor, or, touching. Something concrete comes into the poetry. And the haiku poems is really short, but as I remember, within that, something, sound, visual things, concrete language popped in. So, frog, old pond, frog jumps in, plop. That's it. So it's that kind of thing. So it's a sound and then a smell, all these, what you're talking about. I think it's really, really important to not get back to, but not to forget our physical world. Then aesthetic world will come, art will come. If you depend on too much language and too much description, Alfred North Whitehead says, we experience more than we can analyze. Is that true? He analyzing it like a crazy, but he gives into the experience, like a John Dewey. Art has experience, So, idea of working, doing, listening, talking, all these dialogical stuff, we are never one-dimensional, always complicates the situation. But this complication is the one we rethink, redo, and recreate. So painting goes on forever. So drawing goes on forever. We keep drawing faces again and again, naked body again and again, because it's truthful. We can re-examine ourselves along with it, I think. I don't know, but I'm throwing out. So anyway, Aaron's description, I think it's beautiful that, this essential part is the part I think we all know. You cook, you know. Randy throws pot, he knows, well, clay is bad. You know when something isn't right in writing, poetry, something unreal or something language is not, oral culture and the literal culture, the differences and how we take advantage of that, take notes, or we don't take notes, but we hear beautiful voice or we are quote. So anyway, to me, I've been long enough to be in this world, and then 30 years ago, I was in the same age. This place gave me opportunity to work, and while I was working, Oldenburg's spoon came. Mine looks like a sesame seed in the garden, What the hell? Martin said, Kinji, art isn't a size, so don't worry. So he gave me courage too. So all these, I think things stays with you, right? Yeah. And then that becomes a measurement to see other person, or to see other arts, and to see other attitude. So this Heidegger is openly open. Do not know the world of closed down world. Always open. That's why he can say openly open. Right? Students, and then we share the same kind of wisdom from those wonderful poets. And Heidegger didn't want to be a poet. I think didn't want to be a philosopher. I think he wanted to be a poet. Poet speaks the truth. Painter reveals truth. Goya, Kathy Kolowitz. Without them, I do not know what the human sorrow is. Matisse, without it, I don't know what the flower is beautiful. Without Heidegger, I don't know what it means to dwell in the world with others. So, that's it. I don't have, thank you.
Thank you, Kinji.
Any questions?
Thank you, Aaron. Let's open it up to a few questions. I want to be mindful of the time. And we are recording, so if you can wait for a microphone to get to you before asking your question.
Thank you both for being here today. Kinji, you mentioned that garden sitting, reading, thinking was one of your sculpture.
Yes.
Was one of your first outdoor projects, and Aaron, your sculpture is one of your first outdoor works. Can both of you talk for a moment about what it means to make work for landscape?
I'm not sure that. Is that working? Okay. I don't know what to say about that. For a landscape, I certainly wasn't. Yeah. I mean, the main thing I was thinking about with that location was that big wall. So it's really more about the architecture there than the landscape. But for myself, like the forest I grew up in, the landscape. To me, that is architectural in the proportions, and that's had a huge influence on my sense of proportion and my position in things, but I can't say specifically, with that piece. But
Aaron, you've talked about before though that when you were thinking about the shape, you wanted this organic shape that people could see from afar, and you were moving away from your deeper carvings. You said because you wanted people to experience from different distances. Right.
Yeah. So yeah. Part of in the sense of the landscape and the long view that you have, I didn't want it to be bogged down in a narrative. Sorry. that you needed to know what exactly is on the surface to feel the sculpture, you know. So that's more of the surface is just a surprise when you hopefully the shape draws you in and then you see the things on it, but it's not necessary to have that narrative be seen from afar. So, yeah.
Should I? Hi there. Can you guys hear me? Cool. All right. I have a question for Aaron. So I was wondering, you have this Bog Walker sculpture, and you work primarily in wood, but you decided to make this large sculpture and then cast it in bronze as opposed to that. And Kinji shared why he liked wood to be outdoors in his scenario. How come you decided to go to bronze as opposed to sticking in wood? And then also, how does bronze speak to like this character or some sort of bog scenario that relates to this, considering we're not really in a bog-like area? So it's kind of interesting.
Well, yeah, I don't know if bronze specifically speaks to it, but so the first part of the question is I wanted to work with bronze, so that's what I did. And then the discovery of working with bronze was that because with wood it's you have a pretty opaque surface, and one of the discoveries that when I was working with bronze is that there's this translucency there that I wasn't expecting, and so I would say I didn't have the answer before that you're asking, but now looking back, I can see what I learned about that, and that and why I would like to work with bronze more is that it's a completely different quality than the opaqueness of wood. So, yeah.
I might also add that the Walker has a long history of introducing artists to new materials in the context of the Sculpture Garden. And when the garden first opened in 1988, Deborah Butterfield made her first bronze horse, which is on view in the Sculpture Garden now.
Aaron? Knowingly or unknowingly, I think you were conscious of the landscape here, and while it's not a bog per se, the landscape is born out of glacial meltwater. And ironically, right, the hole that's being dug right now on the hill is actually responding to this hole or sinkhole that sort of keeps appearing. And I remember reaching out to you when we were trying to name the restaurant Esker Grove. Mm-hmm. And you kind of taught me about moraines and esker and talking about was this appropriate sort of acknowledgement of the landscape. So whether you are aware of it or not, the Bog Walker that emerges from this landscape that's always shifting and changing, through the conditions of the water and the landscape and that history.
It is true.
You intuited
it's harder to see it when you've got this urban structure that so many, especially when I saw the way they were constructing the hill with all the styrofoam, it looked like a big Minecraft landscape. And the whole hill is stacked styrofoam and then dirt over the top, which is pretty amazing. But
We'll take a couple more questions.
I actually had a follow-up question
Yeah.
on the bronze use, because I think it's really beautiful. Why go with the particular finish? And then you said you're interested in more bronze work. Do you think that you'll take a part in the foundry activity of casting that?
I don't know if I enjoy the foundry. What I like about carving is that there's not a lot of dust. There's no dust. So as far as my daily activity, I don't really want to do that. But when I was there for the patina, we didn't really know what we were going to do. And I had one idea, and then in the process of getting to that point, we discovered another thing, which the foundry person was like, well, I don't know, that's not really an official patina, but it had this. We got this kind of almost a gunmetal quality to it, and so that was just another thing that happened along the way. And I'm sure the more you worked with bronze, there's so much you can do with it. But it was really a learning experience for me. and not a cap. You know what I mean? Like I really thought about it as like, well, here's an opportunity. I'm going to make something new, discover something new, and throw it out there and see what happens. And that's what I'm in the process of figuring out. I'm still coming to terms with what I made, you know? Now that you see it in a spot, it's like, what is it that I made? You know, so that takes a while to unpack for myself.
There is, I think, a question down here.
Thank you very much. So my question is, so as a designer, my intellect is sometimes huge obstacle, and I really trust myself and my potential, but my thinking sometimes just interrupt all of my work. So how do you really like balance, you know, intellect and also between intellect and something deeper in your life? Thank you.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't have an answer anyway, but I have some questions, you know. It's like idea of intellect seems to be, again, avoiding the sensuousness, one's own sensuousness, and then trying to find the right language or right context in terms of language. So you're always against the kind of linguistic world, spoken or written, and the theoretical interest, like a Western tradition of analysis or analogical, not the descriptive. It's a very, Asian is a very descriptive, or some French is very descriptive. Not, it's more like a sound quality and, oh, I love that woman's voice, or, you know, I love the way how it's said. It's not what is said. So I think this is another kind of, you know, endeavor that intellect is important, but always stays in the head. But if you use here, I mean, it's a metaphor, maybe okay. I had a friend who is a Zen master, and then I had a graduate student from MCAD coming to visit my studio with him. And we asked the question, what is art, you know? What is aesthetics in Zen world? And he just couldn't answer. He just bent his head down a little while. And he said, it's like a golden string in my heart. When I see or hear that string plucked, and that's happens, then I can say something aesthetically in my body is happening. So it's a body reaction he was talking about, not the head reaction. So intellect is important in academic world, everything else. But in order to be musician, in order to be dancer, you have to use the five senses and your body. Simply that. And the beginning of I read, you know, his language of doing and working is more important. Praxis with the X, not the practice with the TI. Praxis means already this activity of doing stuff. When you're doing, you cannot just do things. You're thinking already. Thinking comes along with the doing. You know, even nailing 16 penny nails on 2x4. How did I do? Or how to do it next time without dimple? Already happens. So I think theory is important in terms of communicating some ideas and the histories and the distance, the values and all that. Absolutely important. Language is important. We breathe in and breathe out. But this, don't forget to use the five senses like dancers or musicians. Then I think something else comes. I think that's the aesthetic experience. So don't get caught. I try not to get caught with a theory. To me, making mistakes and the boo-boos, and that's more fun.
Yeah, I think, you know, as far as like design or how you come about, it's like, for me, the works that mean the most to me are the things that make me kind of uncomfortable when I'm done, and I think maybe I'm right on the verge of making something really terrible, and then it's like, then you're done, you finish, and you're like, yeah, maybe it's really bad.
Yeah, right.
But that's the thing that I learned from the most, and I have to live with, you know, like we have to live with ourselves, right? So, yeah, that's what I get out of making things. And so, as far as design as aesthetics, usually, I think it's best when something is a little bit embarrassing to yourself, and just on that edge of, you know, maybe you did it wrong, you know.
Does it sounds okay? Okay.
Thank you, Kinji. Thank you, Aaron. And thanks to all of you for coming out, and we welcome you to walk outside.
Thank you very, very much being here. Thank you.